When a young boy stumbled across a human trafficking operation, he ran straight to a police officer for help, pleading for him to believe his story. But can the cop be trusted, or will the boy's discovery set off a chain of events that put his life in unimaginable danger? This is a story of bravery, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Jake Carter walked home through the outskirts of Havenport on a breezy late afternoon, trying to shake off the weight that had grown heavier on his shoulders since his father's passing. He was 14 years old, tall for his age, with a thin build and a serious gaze that reflected both curiosity and caution. The death of his father, Logan Carter, a local officer, had changed him in ways that he scarcely understood. He had grown quieter, more observant of the people around him, as though he expected betrayal or hidden agendas lurking in every shadow. His mother, Angela Carter, often told him that she worried about how much older he seemed now, less carefree, more guarded. Havenport was the sort of town where everyone believed they knew everyone else's business. Modest shops lined the main street, and families gathered for small festivals every few months to celebrate harvests or local traditions. Jake's father had once been a cherished figure among the townspeople. He was the friendly officer who took time to visit local schools, teach kids about safety, and offer an encouraging smile to anyone who passed him on the street. When Logan died under suspicious circumstances months ago, half the town mourned. The other half whispered rumors of corruption, secrecy, or some greater scheme afoot. That evening, a restless urge compelled Jake to take a different route home from a friend's house. He wanted to be alone with his thoughts, trying to sort through the day's events and the persistent ache of grief. As the sun dipped low in the sky, he passed rows of old industrial buildings on Greenwood Road, half-rotted from disuse. Everyone in Havenport said that these buildings were leftovers from an abandoned shipping business that never took off. Teenagers occasionally sneaked in to explore or vandalize them, but Jake had never been that adventurous. He generally preferred reading at home, helping his mother in the kitchen, or playing games with friends in more familiar areas. Yet an odd flicker of light dancing through the broken slats of one old warehouse caught his attention. He paused, feeling a faint tingle of warning in his stomach, but his curiosity got the better of him. He inched closer, mindful of the uneven gravel that crunched under his sneakers. The building loomed in front of him, with wide doors chained shut and shattered windows. From inside came faint illumination that seemed too irregular to be the glow of a flashlight, more like a pulsating lamp or a small lantern. Jake told himself he would just take a quick look. If it turned out to be nothing, he would shrug it off and continue home. But as he stepped gingerly around the side of the warehouse, he heard muffled voices. With his heart beginning to pound, he crept toward a gap in the wall where a plank was missing. Holding his breath, he peered in. At first, it took his eyes a few seconds to adjust. Then, he saw a sight that made his blood run cold. On the warehouse floor, dozens of people sat huddled, wrists bound behind them, their faces streaked with dirt and fear. Some were older, others looked barely older than he was. A few wore clothes that were torn and ragged, suggesting they had been kept captive for more than a few days. A small group of men stood around, talking in low, urgent tones. Their expressions were grim, and they had the lean, guarded posture of people who did not want to be interrupted. Jake noticed they carried heavy clubs or metal rods at their belts, which they occasionally tapped against their legs in a disturbing show of control. Jake's heart thrashed as he realized what he was seeing: a human trafficking operation, here in his sleepy town. The boy's pulse hammered so wildly in his ears that he was sure someone would hear it. He felt a desperate need to do something, anything, to help these people. But what could a 14-year-old do against such dangerous criminals? Fear froze him, but only for a moment, before his racing mind began urging him to gather proof. If he could just capture a photo and bring it to an officer he trusted, maybe they could rescue these victims. He fumbled for his phone with shaking fingers, praying that the men inside would not notice the faint glow of his screen. As quietly as he could manage, he raised the phone to the gap and snapped a picture. The angle was poor, and the photograph blurred, but it showed enough silhouettes of the captives, the rope around their wrists, and a tall figure brandishing a menacing rod in the corner. Jake realized that if anyone spotted him, he would have no real means of defending himself. Swallowing hard, he eased away from the wall, carefully placing each foot so as not to disturb the gravel. Only when he made it around the far corner of the building did he break into a run. The reality of what he had witnessed fueled a frantic terror in him. He sprinted down Greenwood Road, heart pounding so violently that his throat felt raw with each gasping breath. He had no idea who to trust, but he remembered that Officer Grant Barber lived in a neighborhood only a few blocks away. Grant was a friend of the family, or at least that was how Jake had once seen him. The man had attended Logan Carter's funeral, had offered comforting words, and was known to the community as a diligent, stand-up police officer. Jake's sneakers kicked up dust and loose gravel as he careened around a corner, relief seizing him when he caught sight of Grant's patrol car parked beneath a flickering street lamp. Officer Barber himself stood nearby, leaning against the car as though he had been on a break. The man looked up, his eyes sharpening when he recognized Jake charging toward him, drenched in sweat and looking distraught. "Jake?" Officer Barber said. "What on earth is going on?" Jake nearly collapsed in front of him, clutching his phone in one hand while trying to steady his breathing. "Officer Barber," he panted, forcing the words out. There's something horrible happening in the old warehouse off Greenwood Road. I saw," he choked on the memory, "people tied up. They looked like they were being held captive. Please, you have to help them." Jake held his phone up, trying to pull up the photograph. His fingers trembled so much that he nearly dropped the device. Grant's expression grew grave, and he put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Slow down, son," he said, voice measured. "Show me what you're talking about." Eager for help, Jake managed to bring up the blurry image on his phone. It was not perfect, but it was enough to see a line of terrified faces in the dim light. Grant Barber stared at the phone for a long moment, his mouth set in a tight line. Jake felt a surge of relief, assuming that the officer's concern was genuine, that they would soon be calling for backup to rescue those people. "Okay," Grant said, speaking slowly. "I believe you, Jake. We have to handle this carefully. Let me see that phone again." Jake offered it to him without hesitation, focusing so intently on the image that he missed the subtle flicker in Grant's gaze. The officer examined the photo one more time and then tapped the screen to turn off the display. Jake waited for him to start calling the station or pulling out his radio. But to Jake's confusion, Grant simply slipped the phone into his own pocket. Jake blinked. "Sir, my phone." Grant forced a smile. "Don't worry. I just need to secure the evidence, all right? This is bigger than you know. Why don't you come with me to my patrol car? I'll call for backup. But I want to keep you safe." Jake hesitated, uncertain why the phone needed to be stowed away. He remembered how close Grant had been to his father, how often they would share stories of traffic stops and local troublemakers. He thought of how Logan had considered Grant a friend. So, Jake swallowed his doubts and followed Grant to the patrol car. The moment they both got in, the officer reached over and turned off the radio. Then he closed the windows. That was when alarm bells started blaring in Jake's mind. Before he had the chance to react, Grant grabbed the back of Jake's head and pressed something cold and metallic, a baton with a blunt tip, against the boy's temple. The shock of betrayal hit Jake like a physical blow. He tried to pull away, but Grant was a grown man, well trained in subduing suspects. Jake's attempts to twist free were futile. "Be quiet," Grant hissed, his face contorted with a grim set of determination. "You had to come to me with this, didn't you? You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Jake's thoughts spiraled in horror and confusion. He remembered everything his father had stood for: integrity, courage, the fight against criminals. "Why?" Jake managed to gasp out, tears pricking at his eyes. "You were my dad's friend." Grant's grip on Jake's wrist tightened. Jake could feel the officer's breath hot against his cheek. "Your father got too close to the truth. He wasn't as discreet as he should have been," Grant muttered, bitterness twisting his voice. "And now here you are, meddling in things that don't concern you." Jake felt a wave of sickness. The mention of Logan Carter's death, and the casual way Grant spoke of it ripped away any lingering innocence Jake had harbored about the world. He had always believed that if an officer wore the uniform, there was an underlying decency, a code of honor. Now that illusion was shattered, replaced by the cold fact that the man who had offered condolences at Logan's funeral was somehow involved in a monstrous crime. Grant told Jake to move out of the car. When Jake resisted, a sharp blow to his side sent him stumbling. He toppled onto the sidewalk, breath knocked out of him. The deserted street offered no sanctuary, and the flickering street lamp felt like a failing beacon in the face of Grant's malicious intent. Jake heard him rummaging with the phone in his pocket, and watched in despair as Grant threw it to the concrete, smashing it beneath his heel. "You won't be needing that," Grant said, voice low. Jake tried to scramble to his feet, ready to run. But Grant caught him by the arm, yanking him back with a punishing twist. Jake cried out, forced to face the same man who, only weeks ago, had told him that if he ever needed anything he could come to him. Grant looked at Jake with an expression that was part fury, part regret. "I'm sorry, kid," Grant said, and Jake thought he actually heard a note of genuine remorse. "But you've seen too much. If you keep quiet, maybe, just maybe, you won't meet the same end your father did." Jake's entire world spun. He fought back with every ounce of strength in his wiry frame. He managed to land a desperate kick on Grant's shin, surprising the officer for a split second. But that advantage vanished almost instantly. Grant retaliated, pushing Jake so hard that the boy's head banged against the side of the patrol car. Pain burst behind Jake's eyes, and a wave of darkness threatened to overwhelm him. He dimly felt himself being dragged away from the car, across the street, into the shadows of an overgrown lot. Jake's vision swam. The taste of blood was in his mouth from biting his tongue during the impact. He remembered hearing Grant's voice, distant and angry, muttering about having to handle things fast. Jake tried to scream for help, but his breath came in ragged, shallow gulps. Everything began to fade until at last, he felt nothing. He might have been left there for hours. By the time a local jogger named Troy Mason found him, early morning light was just beginning to brush the eastern sky. Troy, a fit man in his 30s, nearly passed by without noticing Jake's sneaker protruding from behind a tangle of weeds. But something caught his peripheral vision, and he slowed. His stomach turned over when he realized that what he was seeing was a battered teenager, motionless on the ground. Troy rushed to Jake's side, tapping his cheek gently, calling out to him, but receiving only a faint groan in response. Panicked, Troy dug out his phone and dialed the emergency services. The paramedics arrived quickly, their sirens slicing through the dawn. They loaded Jake onto a stretcher, carefully checking his vital signs. He was alive, but unresponsive. Angela Carter got the call a short time later, when she was already up and worrying because Jake had never come home the night before. Her heart pounded in her chest, the fear of losing another loved one nearly paralyzing her. She raced to the hospital, her mind circling relentlessly. How could this happen? Who would do such a thing to her boy? It was barely 3 months since Logan's funeral. Now Jake was in a hospital bed, battered and unconscious. When Angela arrived at Jake's bedside, the doctor explained that he had a nasty wound on his head, bruises on his arms and torso, but no immediate signs of lasting internal damage. Still, he needed rest and observation. Angela clasped Jake's hand and felt a swirl of memories crash over her. Logan's laughter in their kitchen, Jake's proud smile whenever his father called him Buddy, the three of them strolling through the local park. A life that felt so normal then, and so far away now. Officer Grant Barber soon appeared at the hospital, wearing a look of feigned concern. "Angela," he said quietly, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder as she stood in the corridor. "I heard a teenager was found beaten. I didn't realize it was Jake until I got word from the paramedics. I'm so sorry. Do you know anything about what happened?" Angela gazed at him, her eyes brimming with worry, and shook her head. "No. I have no idea. Jake didn't come home last night, and then the hospital called." Grant put on his best sympathetic expression. "We're going to look into this. I'll personally make sure we find whoever did this to him." He patted her shoulder again, offering a small nod that was presumably meant to reassure. Angela, her mind still spinning, barely registered the odd glint in his eyes. Days passed. Jake remained in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness. Angela spent her every waking hour at his bedside, sometimes dozing in the stiff chair, sometimes pacing the hallway in a haze of anxious exhaustion. She was plagued by memories of Logan's final weeks, how restless and anxious he had been, how he'd said he was on the cusp of exposing a big case that could rock Havenport. Then suddenly, Logan was reported dead from a random altercation that no one had fully explained. It seemed incomprehensible that another tragedy would befall her family so soon. Jake eventually woke, his mind still foggy, but he recognized Angela and immediately clutched her hand as though he feared losing her. Over the course of several hours, with many pauses to rest, Jake told his mother what had happened, the warehouse, the bound captives, and how he had raced to Grant for help. Angela listened in stunned silence, her breath catching when Jake recounted the moment Grant turned on him. She stared at her son, tears on her cheeks. "Grant?" she whispered. "Are you sure?" "Mom," Jake croaked, his throat raw. "I'm positive. He's involved. He has something to do with that warehouse and the people being held. He tried to kill me." Angela's mind spun with denial and horror. For years, Grant Barber had seemed like such a pillar of the community, always showing up to local events and smiling in group photos. He and Logan had served on the same force. "But that can't be," she stammered. Jake's voice cracked. "He threatened me. He said Dad was too close to the truth. He said it like he was glad Dad was gone. Mom, Dad was investigating something huge before he died, wasn't he?" Angela thought back to Logan's strange behavior during those final weeks. His restlessness, the locked drawers in his study, the phone calls he would take behind closed doors. She had not pried, figuring that if Logan could share, he would. But after his death, she found scraps of notes about suspected corruption, references to names she did not recognize, and the repeated mention of trafficking. At the time, she had assumed Logan was working on a standard law enforcement case. Now the puzzle pieces were snapping into place in the worst possible way. They both knew that if Grant was as entrenched in this scheme as Jake claimed, going to the local police might be dangerous. Who else was in on it? They would need an ally outside the department. Angela thought of Robert Hamilton, the town's mayor, who had been a close friend of Logan's, always supportive of him and praising his integrity. She looked at Jake with a determined glint in her eyes. "We'll contact the mayor," she said. "We can't trust the police. But maybe Mayor Hamilton can get us outside help." Jake gave a weak nod, relief mingling with his lingering fear. "Mom, please, be careful." In the waiting area down the hall, Angela made the call to Mayor Hamilton. Though it was late, he answered promptly, concern apparent in his voice. She explained in halting words that Jake had uncovered something terrible, that Officer Grant Barber was not who he seemed to be, and that the local force might be compromised. Hamilton listened gravely. There was a heavy pause at the end of Angela's story before the mayor said, in a hushed tone, "I'm bringing in federal agents, Angela. We have to do this quietly. Stay at the hospital. Don't trust anyone who approaches you without my say-so." The next day, Angela woke in the hospital room with a start when two newcomers arrived. One was a woman with her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and a badge that read Agent Hannah Price. The other was a man with a neat beard and watchful eyes, introduced as Agent Kevin Moore. They were from the FBI, the mayor had told her. Price greeted Angela calmly, but there was a flicker of empathy in her expression as she glanced toward Jake, who was propped up on pillows, still pale and bruised. "Mrs. Carter," Agent Price said, "I'm so sorry for what your family has been through. We're here to help you and your son." She kept her voice low but focused. "We understand you believe Officer Grant Barber is involved in a trafficking ring. Could you or Jake provide details?" Angela deferred to Jake, and in a series of ragged whispers, Jake recounted what he saw in the warehouse. He also explained Grant's betrayal and the fear that the local station might be compromised. Agent Price listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes on a small pad. Then she looked at Angela. "We'd like to set up protective detail for you both, Mrs. Carter. If Grant is involved, he might still have allies, and we don't want your son vulnerable to any further attacks." Angela exhaled, relief and fresh anxiety colliding. "Yes, please," she said. "We need that." Meanwhile, in a darkened office on the far side of Havenport, Grant Barber was busy destroying incriminating documents and transferring funds from hidden accounts. He had kept a low profile since the night he left Jake in a ditch, but he had begun hearing whispers about an FBI presence in town. The ring of criminals he had been colluding with demanded answers, and tensions ran high. If the mayor had truly brought in federal agents, then everything might unravel soon. Grant cursed under his breath, furious that a 14-year-old boy had set this cascade of events into motion. He attempted to check on Jake's condition at the hospital the following day, under the guise of friendly concern, only to see that the door to Jake's room was guarded by an unfamiliar man in a suit, no uniform, just a quiet presence that suggested federal authority. Grant's stomach churned, and he hurried away before anyone noticed him lingering. He realized that the net was closing around him. If he did nothing, he might be arrested within days. Grant arranged a clandestine meeting with several of his criminal associates. They gathered in a disused shed near the old harbor. The men asked him what the plan was, how they would move the merchandise, as they called the trafficking victims. Grant explained that their best bet was to relocate everything before the FBI launched a raid. The men cursed about how quickly the outside authorities had arrived. "We'll need leverage," one man pointed out. "We can't just abandon the operation." Grant considered the possibility of kidnapping or threatening someone influential in Havenport. But kidnapping Jake again, or Angela Carter, seemed too predictable now that the FBI was involved. Then one of the criminals mentioned that there was an unscheduled group of captives in a different, smaller warehouse that had not yet been discovered by the authorities. The man suggested using one of these individuals as leverage if the FBI cornered them, effectively forcing a stand-down. Grant weighed the idea. It was risky, but everything about this operation was now precarious. He had never anticipated a bright teenager stumbling into that old warehouse and blowing the lid off their entire arrangement. Left with few options, Grant gave a terse nod, finalizing plans to move captives between sites, orchestrate false leads, and avoid detection. Time was short. At the hospital, Jake and Angela remained under FBI protection. Jake's condition improved. He told Agent Price everything he could remember about the layout of the abandoned warehouse, describing the stacked crates, the approximate number of guards, and the chilling way they threatened the captives. Agent Price decided they would carry out a midnight raid at the warehouse, using a small team of trusted agents. She emphasized secrecy to avoid tipping off any corrupt local officials. Angela stayed by Jake's side, praying for the operation to succeed. That night, 2 unmarked vehicles with FBI agents pulled up to the deserted Greenwood Road. They navigated around the perimeter of the building with flashlights, scanning for signs of life. The men and women who stepped out wore dark jackets but bore no local police insignia. One of them forced open the side entrance, while another kept watch outside, whispering into a communication device. Inside, the warehouse was nearly empty. The open space echoed with the scuff of the agents' shoes. Their flashlights roamed over dust-laden floors and piles of scrap debris. Only a few stray crates remained, their lids askew, revealing trash or random old supplies that meant nothing. There were no bound captives, no group of criminals. The entire place smelled of stale air and regret. Agent Price stood in the center of the floor, her jaw clenched. "They cleaned it out," she muttered. One of her colleagues pointed out scraps of rope on the ground where it seemed people might have been tied, but there was no one left. Price's frustration was palpable. That was when another agent discovered a burned trash bin near the far wall. Inside it were partially melted documents, shipping manifests, scribbled notes about arrivals and departures of certain cargo. The documents were mostly illegible, but a few lines remained intact, referencing another location in a neighboring city. Jake and Angela were informed of the outcome. The group had likely fled. "But we did find some clues," Agent Price said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll keep following the trail." Jake felt a crushing guilt, as though by telling Grant first, he had handed the criminals time to vanish. He stewed in that regret until Angela reminded him that he had done nothing wrong. "You trusted the wrong person, Jake," she told him gently. "But that doesn't make this your fault." The next day, the FBI discovered more signs of corruption within the Havenport Police Department. When they tried to check certain cases handled by Grant Barber, they uncovered files that had gone missing. Interrogating some other officers led to half-answers and nervous glances. Clearly, Grant's influence ran deep. Realizing how compromised the department was, Agent Price quietly reached out to her superiors. They would need a bigger operation to take down the ring. For Jake, the fear was constant, blooming in the quiet corners of every hour. He dreaded that Grant might reappear, determined to finish what he started. Angela felt it too, always glancing over her shoulder whenever she stepped into a hallway or the hospital cafeteria. The FBI assigned them an around-the-clock guard, yet the tension never truly lifted. Once or twice, Angela mustered the courage to slip out to get fresh clothes from home. Each time, she felt a cold dread pass through her when she considered that Grant might be lurking somewhere, watching. Meanwhile, Grant's associates had already moved most of the captives to a new location outside of Havenport. A second warehouse on the outskirts of a larger city served as their temporary base. They intended to keep these hostages until they could be transported elsewhere. The men were enraged that the entire operation was at risk because of a single boy. And they cursed Grant for not disposing of the problem more effectively. Grant, for his part, wrestled with his conscience late at night. He had never considered himself a heartless criminal, but the lure of power and money had sucked him into a vicious cycle. One small act of corruption led to another, until he found himself in so deep that there was no easy way out. He reminded himself that turning back meant prison time or worse. So he pressed on, rationalizing that he was too far gone to walk away. Days turned into a tense week. The FBI discovered references to a second warehouse, and Agent Price prepared another raid. This time, they took extra measures to ensure secrecy, employing minimal local resources and waiting until the last possible moment to mobilize. Angela and Jake remained under guard at the hospital, though Jake was nearly well enough to go home. The night of the second raid arrived. 2 black vans rolled out of a secure lot under Agent Price's direction. The team was smaller but more specialized, with intelligence that strongly indicated the presence of captives in that out-of-town warehouse. They approached in darkness, parking some distance away, then moving in on foot to avoid alerting any lookouts. The approach felt like a coiled spring, every agent on edge, anticipating confrontation. The question in everyone's mind was whether Grant Barber himself would be there. They stormed the warehouse at approximately 1 in the morning, lights cutting through the gloom as agents ordered everyone inside to stay still. This time, they found more than a dozen people in various states of misery, some bruised, some malnourished, all terrified. Their hands were bound with rope, and they flinched at the shouting, uncertain whether these newcomers were saviors or yet another wave of tormentors. An agent calmly knelt to reassure them that they were safe now, cutting through restraints and offering water. Several criminals were caught off guard and apprehended swiftly. Others tried to flee through the back, but the FBI had formed a perimeter. The takedown was considered a success, and the immediate priority was ensuring medical attention for the rescued captives. Yet, to Agent Price's frustration, Grant Barber was nowhere to be found. Some of the criminals, once pressed, acknowledged that Grant had warned them about law enforcement activity. But apparently he had set out on his own with a single hostage as leverage, someone who had slipped through the cracks when the others were moved. If that story was true, it meant there was at least one more victim in immediate danger, and that Grant was desperate enough to use them to negotiate his escape. Agent Price wasted no time issuing a warrant for Grant's arrest. By dawn, half the local news stations were reporting a major corruption scandal in Havenport. The name of Officer Grant Barber was whispered with shock and outrage, though official statements still referred to him only as a person of interest. The FBI wanted no slip-ups that might let him avoid capture on a technicality. Jake learned of the raid's success that morning, feeling relief that so many people had been freed. Still, a nagging sense of unfinished business gnawed at him. "He's still out there," Jake said quietly to Angela, who sat at his bedside. "He's not just going to give up." Angela sighed, weariness lining her face. She placed a hand on Jake's. "I know. We have to trust that Agent Price and her team will find him." In a cramped, secluded cabin deep in a wooded area, Grant Barber paced restlessly. He had turned the single hostage, a young adult, into an insurance policy. The poor individual lay bound and gagged on a cot in the corner, eyes bloodshot from fear and exhaustion. Grant knew time was short. The FBI would be scanning every possible lead, and local folks might recognize him if he tried to buy supplies. He was running on adrenaline and desperation. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent behind the treeline, Grant decided to risk calling an old contact for help getting out of the state. He whispered into a borrowed phone, using coded language, hoping the FBI was not already tracking him. He learned that the highways were crawling with law enforcement, that he might be better off hiding until the attention waned. The trouble was, every passing hour increased the risk that someone would stumble across his hideout. While Grant scrambled for options, Agent Price and her FBI colleagues interrogated the criminals captured in the second raid. A few were willing to talk, pointing them in the general direction of the forest region where Grant might be holed up. The criminals insisted that Grant planned to use his hostage as a bargaining chip. "He's lost it," one captive confessed. "He was always proud, but now he's cornered." Agent Price informed Angela and Jake that they were close to finding Grant. "The more we learn, the more we see he was central to this entire network," Price explained. "Your father," she added, nodding at Jake, "must have been gathering evidence on these operations. That's likely why Grant orchestrated his downfall." Jake's eyes filled with sorrow at the thought that Logan might have died trying to protect the town. Later that evening, Agent Price received a tip from a local park ranger who had noticed footprints and a car hidden beneath branches near an old logging trail. The ranger had also seen a faint glow through the forest around dusk, as though someone had set up a light in a cabin that was supposed to be abandoned. Price assembled a team of agents and prepared to head out. She told Angela and Jake to remain in protective custody, as the final apprehension of Grant might be dangerous. They agreed to comply, though Jake wished he could personally see Grant face justice for what he did. Under the cover of night, the agents navigated the narrow trail in unmarked cars, headlights off to maintain the element of surprise. Silence blanketed the woods except for the crunch of tires on dirt and the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Finally, they parked some distance away, proceeding on foot. The forest was thick, branches and ferns rustling softly. Eventually, through the trees, they spotted a faint glow and the outline of a small cabin. In that cabin, Grant Barber sensed rather than saw movement outside. He froze in mid-step, extinguishing his lone lantern to better peer out the window. The hostage moaned softly, and Grant hissed for silence. Through the glass, Grant caught glimpses of shifting shapes. The FBI had arrived. Agent Price stepped forward once the team encircled the cabin. Keeping her voice steady, she called out, "Grant Barber, this is the FBI. We know you're in there. We have you surrounded. Release the hostage and come out with your hands raised." Grant's mind raced. He looked at the hostage, who stared back at him with a mixture of hope and terror. He realized that if he surrendered, his entire life would be over. But if he hurt the hostage, the feds would swarm in, and that would seal his fate as well. He grabbed a wooden rod from a corner, pressing it close to the hostage's side. "Back off!" he bellowed through the door. "I have someone in here. If you come any closer, you're forcing my hand." Outside, the tension was suffocating. Agent Price signaled the team to hold position. She knew that any rash move could lead to tragedy. She attempted to negotiate, reminding Grant that harming the hostage would only make things worse. In the gloom, the rest of her team fanned out, seeking vantage points through the cabin's small windows. They saw Grant's silhouette pacing back and forth, occasionally glancing toward the door. Grant's chest heaved with every breath. He realized the entire forest was silent now, as if even the wildlife held its breath. His hand, wrapped around the wooden rod, trembled slightly. This was the end game. One slip, and everything would go up in smoke. He considered making a run for it, but the cabin was surrounded. He could almost sense the agents out there, waiting, each ready to lunge the moment he stepped outside or tried to harm the hostage. An hour passed in this standoff. Agent Price tried various tactics, offering a phone line to talk, promising that the hostage would be taken out safely. Inside, Grant felt trapped like a wild animal. At length, desperation pushed him into a corner of his own making. He decided to try and escape out the back, using the hostage as a human shield. He forced the hostage to stand, still bound, and led them toward the back window, which he had pried loose earlier as a potential exit route. Outside, an agent heard the scrape of metal on wood. The team realized Grant was trying to slip away. They converged on that side of the cabin, shifting their positions. Grant flung the window open and tried to maneuver the hostage through. But the second the window's frame rattled, an agent at the side fired off a bright flare into the air. Its glare illuminated the area in a sudden burst, revealing Grant's exact position. Grant's plan fell apart. Agents rushed in with a battering ram at the front door, which splintered under the force. Two more agents positioned themselves at the back corner, shining powerful flashlights and yelling for Grant to get down. The confusion was total. The hostage stumbled, momentarily free from Grant's grip. In that instant, the lead agent at the front collided with the door, letting in a wave of federal law enforcement. Grant felt bodies slam into him. Someone wrenched the wooden rod from his hands. He fought with surprising ferocity, rage and terror fueling him. But it was no use. Within seconds they had him pinned to the floor, arms twisted behind his back. The hostage slumped to the side, crying out in relief as the ropes around their wrists were cut by one of the FBI agents. The entire takedown happened in under a minute, but it felt like an eternity to those involved. Grant Barber, breathing hard, glared at the agents. He spat out curses, his eyes wild. "You have no idea what you're doing," he snarled. But the fight was gone from him. The FBI had him at last. The next morning, news broke across Havenport. The mayor stood in front of the press, confirming that a major ring of human traffickers had been dismantled, thanks to federal cooperation. He mentioned the name of the brave young teenager who first discovered the hideous operation, though he did not elaborate on Jake's personal suffering. He also confirmed that a local police officer was in custody for his role in orchestrating the crimes. Back at the hospital, Jake watched the coverage on a small television in his room, Angela by his side. They saw a grainy video of Grant being escorted in handcuffs, his face twisted in a blend of anger and defeat. Jake felt a swirl of emotions, relief that Grant was caught, sorrow for the betrayal, and the lingering ache of having once admired this man. Angela placed her hand on his shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. But it was not entirely over. There would be a trial. The FBI warned Jake that he would likely be called to testify as a key witness. The idea of facing Grant in court made Jake's stomach twist, yet he also felt a sense of grim resolve. He thought of all the people he had seen bound in that warehouse, the hopelessness in their eyes. If speaking up would ensure justice, then he would do it. In the weeks that followed, the prosecution built their case against Grant. They amassed an overwhelming pile of evidence, testimonies from rescued captives, financial records linking Grant to criminal enterprises, logs that revealed how he had sabotaged investigations under the guise of police work. They even found partial records from Logan Carter's personal notes, indicating that Logan had nearly blown the whistle on Grant's entire operation before he was found dead under suspicious circumstances. The day of the trial arrived. Jake, now fully recovered, stepped into the courthouse wearing a neatly pressed shirt that felt stiff around his collar. Angela walked beside him, her posture both protective and proud. Reporters thronged outside, cameras flashing as they tried to capture images of the brave teenage whistleblower. Agent Price was already inside, briefing with the attorneys. Grant Barber sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 lawyers. He appeared haggard, the darkness under his eyes etched deeper by sleepless nights in a holding cell. When Jake took the stand, he tried not to look at Grant. Instead, he focused on the jurors and the prosecutor. In a clear, if quavering voice, he recounted the night he stumbled upon the warehouse, how he trusted Grant with the evidence, and how the officer attacked him, took his phone, and left him for dead. "Would you identify that officer?" asked the prosecutor. Jake nodded, eyes flicking toward the defense table. "He's sitting right there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Officer Grant Barber." The defense attempted to rattle Jake, suggesting that he might have been confused or that his injuries had affected his memory. But Jake held firm, answering questions with quiet precision. His recounting of Grant's words, particularly references to Logan Carter's death, sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Throughout it, Grant sat with a rigid face, occasionally exchanging whispered comments with his lawyers, but never meeting Jake's gaze directly. Next came testimonies from some of the trafficking victims who recognized Grant as the orchestrator who gave instructions and ensured that local law enforcement would not intervene. Their harrowing stories of captivity tore at the hearts of everyone present. Some cried while recounting how they had been moved from location to location, threatened, and told that attempts at escape would be futile. The prosecutors highlighted the pattern of Grant's involvement, forging police documents, tampering with evidence, and sharing sensitive operational details with criminals. A particularly damning piece of the puzzle came from Logan Carter's old notes, which showed that he suspected a high-level conspiracy involving an officer. One page read, "G. Barber controlling leads. Must confirm ties to major operation." Another line said, "Grant questioned me about names. Doesn't add up. Danger is real." These notes indicated that Logan had been close to uncovering everything, only to be silenced. The trial stretched on for several intense days. Outside, the public atmosphere was a mixture of fury and disbelief. People found it hard to accept that an officer once celebrated at community events could be responsible for such vile crimes. Some local businesses displayed signs in support of Logan Carter, praising his integrity. Others organized small fundraisers to help the survivors who had been rescued from the traffickers, providing clothing, housing, and medical care. On the final day of testimony, Grant Barber chose to speak in his own defense. His words were laced with denial, claiming he was a victim of circumstances, that the real criminals had forced him to comply. He tried to muddy the waters by attacking Logan Carter's reputation, insinuating that Logan had been reckless. But the jury did not appear swayed. The mountain of evidence overshadowed any excuses Grant offered. In her closing argument, the lead prosecutor painted a stark contrast between Logan Carter, a dedicated, honorable officer who died seeking justice, and Grant Barber, who used his badge to protect and profit from human suffering. The prosecutor pointed to Jake as a symbol of how even an ordinary kid who glimpses wrongdoing can stand up and help bring it to light. The jury deliberated for a relatively short time, returning a unanimous verdict of guilty on all major counts: corruption, human trafficking, abduction, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit further acts of exploitation. When the judge pronounced Grant's sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, an audible sigh of relief rippled through the courtroom. Angela clasped Jake in a tight hug, tears slipping down her cheeks. She murmured, "We did it, Jake. It's finally over." In the ensuing days, the media storm continued, but Jake and Angela found themselves wrapped in a sense of closure. The nightmares of finding captives in the warehouse lingered, but at least the perpetrators were behind bars. Jake learned to navigate a newfound local celebrity, as some of his classmates looked at him with awe for his role in unveiling the operation. Others, however, kept their distance, unsure how to respond to someone who had undergone such a terrifying ordeal. Mayor Hamilton, deeply shaken by the scandal, vowed to rebuild trust in Havenport's police department. He announced reforms, background checks, and invitations for federal oversight to ensure that no such conspiracy could thrive again. Agent Price concluded her investigation and prepared to move on to a new assignment, but not before dropping by the Carter household to say goodbye. She handed Angela a small box of personal effects from Logan's old office. A few commendation medals, a plaque with his name. Angela's voice quivered when she thanked the agent for everything. "You and Jake were brave," Agent Price said. "We just did our job. I hope life gets a little easier for you both now." Jake offered her a faint, grateful smile. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing me." Not long after, Angela decided to organize a modest memorial in Logan's honor. This time, it was not just to mourn him but to celebrate his legacy. She placed a small plaque at the community center, naming it after her late husband. Several townspeople gathered to place flowers and speak of how Logan had shaped their lives for the better, whether by inspiring them or simply showing them kindness. Jake, standing beside his mother, felt a swell of pride mixed with lingering sorrow. If only his father could see that Havenport had not forgotten him. With the trial behind them and Grant Barber removed from the streets, life gradually found a new rhythm for Angela and Jake. The hush of grief still lingered in corners of their home, but there was also a renewed sense of relief. Jake returned to a lighter schedule at school while continuing therapy sessions to cope with the trauma. He spent many afternoons sketching or writing in a journal, channeling his emotions in a more constructive way than burying them inside. Angela, for her part, resumed part-time work and made sure to balance it with moments of quiet time with her son. They took walks together along the riverside park that Logan had once loved. Step by step they healed. Jake sometimes had nightmares, flashes of the warehouse and the terrifying moment Grant brandished a heavy rod near his head. But each morning, he woke with the reminder that he was safe now. The knowledge that he helped free those people and bring an end to a vast trafficking ring comforted him. He no longer felt helpless. He had faced something beyond his years and survived. Eventually, the FBI concluded their final debrief with the local authorities, tying up loose ends. Additional arrests were made based on the testimonies of the criminals in custody, ensuring that the network's key players were dismantled. A sense of renewed hope settled on Havenport, even though the town would bear the scars of betrayal for a long time. One quiet afternoon, Angela and Jake stood at Logan's graveside, a light breeze ruffling the grass. Angela placed a fresh bouquet on the headstone. Jake knelt beside it, running his fingers over his father's name. "Dad," he said softly, "it's done. The people who hurt you aren't going to hurt anyone else. I promise." Angela touched Jake's shoulder, tears in her eyes. She did not speak because words felt too small for the moment. Instead, she let the hush of the cemetery convey the gratitude they felt for Logan's life, and the sorrow that he was not there to share in their relief. They remained there for a long while, allowing themselves the peace of knowing that justice had been served, that Logan had not died in vain. When Jake returned to normal life, the memory of that horrifying night on Greenwood Road still haunted him, but it also propelled him forward. He developed a sharper moral compass, a desire to champion the voiceless, and a determination not to let fear silence him ever again. Angela saw that spark in her son and knew that Logan would have been proud to witness it. Their world, once shattered, was beginning to mend piece by piece. The following week, Angela and Jake visited the newly placed memorial plaque at the community center. The plaque read, "In memory of Officer Logan Carter, for his integrity and courage in protecting the vulnerable and seeking truth." Jake gently traced the engraved letters. Some part of him still ached for the moments he would never get back with his father, but another part felt a sense of belonging to something bigger, Logan's legacy of doing what was right, even if it came at a cost. As mother and son turned to leave, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the grounds of the community center. A gentle breeze wafted by, stirring the leaves in the nearby trees. Angela slipped an arm around Jake's shoulders, and they walked away together, heading toward the fresh start that awaited them. The fight for justice had been difficult, painful, and frightening, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. And that simple fact gave them hope that perhaps in the future, Havenport would stand stronger against the darkness. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.